Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room.
Okay, thank you everyone. So is there some people that are coming in?
Crowded there.
So, obviously, as we know, we have our evidence sessions today on road safety, and we have the A5 Western Transport Corridor Scheme as well. And I'm just going to proceed through the agenda. Just remember, folks, that if you do have devices that are on, to make sure that they are muted or turned off. And 3G and 4G, 5G should not be used. No recordings or photographs of the meeting. So you're all very welcome. I have apologies, one from Cathal Boylan, and I think that's it. So declarations of interest or remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So I'm going to ask, does any members have any interest they wish to declare? Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, it's not the declaring interest, it's just to make you aware I'm going to have to nip out at some point for 10 or 15 minutes, maybe around 11 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? I have an item of interest to declare, and it's just that my family live along the A5 route. So it's just to make that. So then the next, anybody else? Any item? No. Sure. So then the next item is Chairperson's business. Members, I am being contacted on social media by a number of taxi drivers who have an issue in the city centre, particularly at night time and at weekends, with people parking in taxi rank bays. This issue was something that we have raised about before in this committee, and we did ask officials when they were in the committee about enforcement. We did get a letter back, and that was on the 22nd of May, I think. We had asked for information on the 1st of May. And the letter basically states that, you know, we'd ask for clarification on signage and enforcement in relation to waiting ranks for taxis. Taxi ranks are signed with fixed upright signs, and they went on to talk about that. They then very briefly touched on the traffic attendants' duties when patrolling, and said that they enforce all parking restrictions, including taxi ranks, and take enforcement action against any vehicle detected in which is parking in contravention. But we didn't get any, I suppose, real figures in relation to how many are actually out at night enforcing what's there. So we're, you know, in terms of reporting back that behaviour and that pattern that seems to be arising every weekend, I think we should maybe request additional enforcement and maybe write back to the department asking to detail how many parking attendants are going out at night, how many enforcement action is taking place in Belfast City Centre, because it does seem to be an ongoing problem. I am aware that raincoats were out, I think, at the weekend, but I don't think it seems to be solving the problem. So are members content with that approach, that we do seek some additional action on that? Content, yeah? Okay, thank you. So at item 4 is draft minutes. At page 7 you'll see draft minutes of proceedings for the meeting on the 12th of June 2024. I advise members that it is proposed that the following line is added to draft minutes before apologies. The Deputy Chairperson assumed the chair in the Chairperson's absence. So I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 12th of June 2024, subject to that amendment being made, and if so, I'll sign the minutes. So are you content with that? And I just want to thank the Deputy Chairperson for stepping in my absence and ably conducting the meeting while I was tuned in from home. So thank you, John. Matters arising, I'm just asking members if they have any matters which they wish to raise from the meeting on the 12th of June 2024. No? Okay. Correspondence is at 6. At page 18 is a correspondence memo. You'll see at page 36 there's correspondence from the Committee for Finance regarding the Public Sector Transformation Board. I'm informing members that the correspondence indicates that departments were to submit their transformation proposals to the Department of Finance by the 14th of June. So obviously we'd like to seek a request, seek an agreement to request a copy of the department's transformation proposals, because it would be really, really good to see that in advance in scrutinising some of the finance. So are members content with that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, at page 40 you'll see correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure regarding grass cutting. I inform the members that the Minister has provided a response to concerns to highlight a response to the committee's concerns around grass cutting of sight lines, which was highlighted during our oral evidence session on the budget on the 29th of May. A further response will follow regarding the works undertaken in May, and clarification will also come of where the responsibility lies between the department and local councils. So I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the items of correspondence at this stage. Does anybody want to? Yeah, Danny?
Yeah, could we get a wee update on the pilot biodiversity project? Please.
Yeah.
Save the bees, Keith.
Don't start.
Can I come in just on
Yeah.
that there? Not on the back of Danny's pipe. Well, it's the back of Danny's topic. The road safety stuff, obviously we see now grass cutting's happening, and it's
Yeah.
happening, and we're now past the point that junctions have been cut. But I think this time next year we'll have to seriously look at that, because if we ask the question, there's no road deaths that I'm aware of that's been happened because of that, but there's been accidents and injury. So, and this is no disrespect to the biodiversity, there's a place for that. I think John made the point about concrete and junction ends. This has to be discussed. We can't have the same thing next year. There's people getting injured and accidents happening because of sightlines. So we can't wait till it's too late to do this most. So we need to look at that for next year. This year now passed to a degree.
Yeah.
Broadly.
Yeah, and so many near misses and things as well. No, I do take your point. So
I will be brief, Chair, and it's on the back of this, but it's also on the back of what Mr. Baker says about the biodiversity. I've also, the amount of weed killer being sprayed on the verges as well is something that needs to be, I think that could be included in any correspondence as well, because certainly in South Down there seems to be a large amount sprayed, to the concern of many of my constituents, and I have corresponded to the Minister. But again, on the back of the biodiversity plan, I think it's important to raise that too.
And then obviously we're going to be getting some clarity in relation to the responsibilities of where departments and councils lie, because I think that's really important, because there's obviously overlap and crossover there. So members content with that at this stage? Yeah? Okay, so I'm just seeking agreement then for the remaining suggested actions as contained in the correspondence memo. All content? Sorry, Keith.
Yeah, I just want to come in on page 44 regarding the 31 million for the drainage cost. I would like a bit of a breakdown on that. I appreciate they give an answer to say, obviously, urban areas, and then a split between Storm and combined, but I'd like to see their mass of how they come up with 31 million. They could do a little simple table to give some understanding of area they're talking about, and not all Storm goes into the system. Storm can get, I know the further urban you are, but it doesn't need to be treated if it's going into shocks and drainage and rivers. So just to get an understanding of, it's a lot of money, but at least to get a wee breakdown of that.
Okay, content
Please.
with that, yeah. Okay. So I'm moving on now to item 7, which is the Road Safety Strategy to 2030 Department for Infrastructure Oral Evidence Session. So page 46 you'll see the clerk's memo. At page 49 you'll see the written evidence from the Department for Infrastructure, and at pages 107 to 139 you'll see transcripts of the oral evidence from the Chief Superintendent Sam Donaldson. And 4 members that an email and papers from the Motorcycle Action Group were forwarded to members yesterday for information in advance of today's evidence session. and the committee will hear directly from that group after the summer recess. So I'm welcoming back to the committee today Dr. Chris Hughes, nice to see you again, Director of Safe and Accessible Travel for the Department for Infrastructure. We have Liam McAvoy, Director of Road Asset Development, Department for Infrastructure. We have David Mullen as well, Head of Strategy, Governance and Driving Policy Branch for the Department of Infrastructure. So as per usual, members, I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard, if you're all content. And then what I'm going to do is allow yourselves to open up the discussion for briefly about 5 minutes, because we're quite keen to come to members' questions, obviously, and we do have all the documents in front of us, which will have been read in advance. So I'll hand over to yourselves. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Members, thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on this, and I promise, Chair, I'll be very, very brief. First of all, I'd like to say that we are very conscious that whenever we're discussing this topic, we are talking about the most horrific things that happens to families and people involved, and we never lose sight of that. And I know that members, in discussing that, reflect on that as well. This morning, I checked on the latest road fatality figures for this year. So this year to date, we have had 30 fatalities on our roads. That compares to 34 last year, which, as members will be aware, was the worst in 8 years. 2 years ago it was 15, and this year we're sitting at 30 at this point in the year. So at this point we are already double where we were 2 years ago. We're not quite as bad as last year, but last year was one of the worst on record. So when we're talking about this strategy, we're very, very fully conscious about the fact, and I know committee have been briefed from a number of people on that. The strategy itself, thank you. You're aware of the document. The document has been published in draft form for since October 2022. It has just recently been approved by the executive, so that is now an executive-approved road safety strategy, and the preparations for the launch of that will be being brought forward in hand in the period ahead. So. This strategy builds on previous road safety strategies. Its approach is to look at the three aspects that cause fatalities, collisions and fatalities: people, roads and vehicles. And it looks at all three of those, because those can be different factors that occur, and they can ebb and flow, and they can come to the fore, and you need to keep an eye on all three. It contains targets. The main target that actually this strategy is, it's an international target which is working towards 0 deaths on the roads by 2050, and there are interim targets that are set to get to that, to staging posts on the way to that. So for example, by 2030, we're looking for the number of people killed on the roads to be less than 35, and at this point in this year, we are currently at 30. And it's 2024, so the challenge is colossal. So we're within that, there are targets. Chair, I was going to leave it at that and just move to questions, just
Super.
To make ourselves available to you.
Super, thank you. I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask was, could you pinpoint, obviously with the draft and it's been agreed by the executive, so could you pinpoint if there has been any changes to what was in draft and what then has been the finalised version from the executive?
So the body of the draft and the approach itself is that there's been some fine-tuning to aspects of it, but I think until it's published...
Until it's published, but the draft that you have is essentially the draft that was shared and approved by executive.
Yeah, so there's no major changes.
There's
no changes in terms of, figures for outcomes or anything like that?
No.
Okay. And then in terms of funding, we heard from Sam Donaldson, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that evidence session. It was quite a long, lengthy evidence session with quite an awful lot in it. But what really struck me from that evidence session was investment in trying to, pardon the pun, drive down those numbers.
Yes.
So can we just explore the breakdown of the funding that road safety would have received over the last 8 years, and how that correlates with, with deaths on the road?
So the question on funding for road safety is just there's aspects of it. So vast amounts of what the department does is based on road safety. So I mean, there may be particular aspects of it that you're interested in. For example, the work that Liam and his folk do is focused on road safety. So I mean, spending on roads and road maintenance is part of the commitment to road safety. We do other activities which are road safety, which will be promotional activities and educational activities. You know, so it depends on what the departmental budget is. If you look at it at that level, what we do know is that people don't die because of the roads. You know, they don't die because of the members, you're aware of what the condition of the roads are. But when we look at the cause of fatal collisions, 95% of them are due to driving while distracted or driving while inattention. The reality is that it's the people aspect. It's the people involved are what are causing fatal collisions and accidents where people are seriously injured as well. Not to diminish that. So depending on the budget. So you know, I know that there's been different aspects of that have gone up and down. But I mean, if there's anything you want to particularly ask about, maybe that I could help you more.
Well, I suppose, you know, you started off by saying with 30 fatalities this year on the roads, we're double where we were 2 years ago.
Yes.
And then last year we had 34 had died on the road. I'm not seeing from anything that's coming to the committee in terms of budget, I'm not seeing huge amounts of money. In fact, I would probably say we have this lovely strategy that's sitting there, but where is the money coming from? Because I'm not seeing it attached to road safety strategy. So it seems a bit, in some respects, counterproductive in ways. You know, you have a lovely strategy there, but how are you going to fund it to actually get these outcomes? So how realistic is it if you're not getting money into this? You know, we're double where we were at 2 years ago, and we're not finished 2024 yet. So, you know, there's an issue there in terms of investment. You're saying there that there's a people aspect that requires education, that requires enforcement, that requires advertising to get the messaging across.
Yeah. So you'll be aware that the draft budget, there's an equality impact assessment for the departmental budget, which is out and currently live at this point in time. So you'll be aware that the process for that is that the final budget decisions will be taken after that has been, the feedback on that after 4 weeks has been fed in, assessed, and then final decisions are taken on the budget. So that's where we are in that process. The funding, so the Minister's view on public sector funding in general is that there has been underinvestment in public funding, and we know that I've listened carefully to Sam Donaldson, Chief Superintendent, who was here giving you an extensive evidence session, and he was saying about the amount of budget cuts that they are dealing with. That is a reality, and we absolutely recognise this. So that budget for this year has yet to be decided and confirmed. Is where we are at this point in time. There are a lot of other monies that are spent on it. Sam was quite clear. You know, he has fewer police officers available to do that. There is less money available that has been, for example, spent on promoting the messaging on that. So within that, we have had to look at how we do more with less. But I mean, the issue about budget available to support the delivery of the strategy is absolutely an issue, Chair. Absolutely.
So then you would agree with the correlation then, investment saves lives, because if we're looking at the figures, if we're investing in road safety by getting those messages across, that reduces our numbers.
That is part of the, you know, so money is one way of delivering messaging and in the constraint, and if you have money it gives you more choices and more options, there's no question about that. And what we need to do is take the budget that is available to us and has been delivered and make that, so we are looking at low cost and no cost options for delivering messaging. Doing all of it is better when what we're doing is looking at what we can do with what's available to us. So the way that, for example, young people consume media is different to the way it was whenever I was a young person, and so there are options through social media channels and different aspects of communication platforms that can be used. There's also a great focus that we have on working with the likes of the 3 sporting codes who are supportive. We have got a lot of political leaders who have thrown their weight behind the Road to Zero campaign, we have all signed up to the Road for Zero campaign, and we encourage other people to do that, so that we are doing what we can within the budget that's available. More budget gives you more options. There is no question about that. That's the simple reality.
Okay, and then before I come to other members, I just want to ask, obviously in that evidence session with Superintendent Sam Donaldson, obviously the police are partner organisations. The police have reduced numbers, and there's significant reductions, which also doesn't help enforcement.
Yes.
So what engagement has there been on the need to invest to achieve the road safety strategy priorities with the likes of those partner organisations?
So the engagement with the partner organisations is extensive, and I'm aware that Chief Superintendent Donaldson, when he was here, mentioned that we have now set up a strategic forum, which is chaired at grade 3 level in the department, and it involves those partner organisations who contribute most to the actions taken to address that, to address collisions and fatalities. The idea behind that forum is specifically to look at how we can make best use of the funding that is available to us across the organisations. It's to ensure that there's coordination and coherence of planning, so each partner organisation will get its funding from within its ministerial allocation. So the department gets an allocation, the minister decides on what that is, and what that forum does is looking at going, are there any areas where we can share data or we can coordinate our actions? There's a lot of cooperation on the ground and at the operational level. There always has been. That's a feature of people. People, when they're engaged in this area, really care, and everybody tries to do their best. And what we're doing now is trying to get at that top level, going, are the things that we can do to fine-tune the best use of the resources? Those are the responsibility of the organisation and the accounting officer for those organisations, and in the department and the minister. And what we're trying to do at an official level, the most senior official level, is to make sure that at an operational level the joins are being made that connect up and make the best use of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to other members. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks so much for coming along today with the answers so far. I think we all acknowledge that we are dealing with life and death here, and I can think of a few higher priorities for this committee and for the department to deal with, and all of our thoughts go out to the families of those who have lost their life on our roads tragically again this year. What I took from Chief Superintendent Donaldson's evidence previously was that there is a mass commitment across every stakeholder to do it, but I did come away thinking that without the investment, that the Road to Zero is just a pipe dream. I'm just interested to hear what your thoughts are on the current trajectory of funding with a limited budget. I appreciate that, about how we actually get there, and is it achievable without the funding being in place?
So funding, and you will anticipate this answer probably, which is it's a matter for the minister. So when the minister decides on what the funding is, then we make the best use available that we can for that. The amount of funding available to spend on the wider aspects of road safety is actually huge when you look at the budget that DFI spends, and vast amounts of it will be spent on things that will help improve roads, which it can be counted as that. So that is where we are on the target of on the achievability of the Road to Zero. So it's a really good question, because I think it's a challenging one that needs to be made. The target is to get to zero deaths by 2050. There's a number of aspects on targets, which is, one, you need to make sure that they are something that you can aspire to and work to, but also realistic. The notion of an achievable zero deaths by 2050 needs to be taken in the realm of the fact that we know that vehicle technology is advancing at a colossal rate. Vehicle safety systems and vehicle safety features are going to save us from the worst of our own judgments. So as technology improves, and technology is improving really, really rapidly, that makes that aspect of the 2050 target actually something that I think that we can say, yes, that is something we can do. If you look back to 1920s building sites where a death a week was considered acceptable, that's not considered acceptable anymore, and it doesn't happen, and they haven't had the technological things. The interim targets are perhaps more challenging because they feel very close and they feel very challenging, and that is a difficult thing. But when in target setting and working towards them, we have to set challenge targets and then work. If there's an element of going, you wouldn't want to lessen the targets because that's like saying it's okay. So these targets are here, and that's what we're working to. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Hughes. You referred to the fact that 95% of fatalities are either driver error or driving without due care and attention, etc. To that end, that is targetable through awareness campaigning, education, etc. So how does the budget look going forward? I think everyone around here grew up with the horrific images that we used to see through the adverts and the impact that had certainly on me and many others. In fact, some people couldn't watch them. We don't see that as often anymore. And you talked about the low-hanging fruit for young people. I think it'd be quite easy to target them through not very expensive campaigns through social media, and potentially as well, and I'm sorry this is a three-part question, I talked last week or the week before to Sam Donaldson about engaging with the national broadcaster to see whether we could do free adverts through them, given the seriousness of this issue. Is that something that's been looked at? And maybe you could just broaden that.
So I'm conscious we have a team who look after the communications aspect, and they work very closely with the PSNI. So I'm conscious that issue was raised, and unfortunately due to leave arrangements I haven't been able to speak to our person on that, but I know that issue was logged and we're now conscious of that. In looking at younger people in particular, the low cost and no cost aspects are ones that they are specifically have been targeting for quite a while, and as we mentioned in the various codes. Social media is a large aspect of it. There's been digital campaign advertising which is being commissioned.
Yeah, the digital campaign's being prepared to go alongside the launch of the road safety strategy, and I think looking at the communications, those advertisements are there. They're historical, but they're still being shared through the Road to Zero campaign. The new digital campaign again is looking at how we bring something like that back in, but for the modern audience. So even simple things like whenever you look at those on your phone, the aspect ratio is wrong and things like that. So there is work being done on that, and it is again looking at targeting the key elements that we're because all this has to be data driven. And when you look at one of the campaigns which was around seatbelts back in the day, that was all data driven. We knew that was a fundamental problem we wanted to address. So again, careless driving, inattention. And we keep talking about careless driving and inattention, but that's all road users, motorcyclists, pedestrians, everybody's contributing towards that level of carelessness. And just on the 96%, it's probably worth saying that's actually 96% of all collisions that result in death or serious injury. And it's not just drivers, it's inattention by all sorts of road users, So yeah, the advertisements, they've got to be targeted, and yes, we have to do the best we can with what we have at the minute, and the team are working, and they do work with the other sort of media outlets and so forth. They're all corporations and they've got their own budgetary requirements and what they can and can't do, but also what they're very, very good for doing is sharing the messages. Unfortunately we're waking up most days to news of collisions, and we get that news through the BBC and so on, so those messages are coming through certainly.
Okay, well, hopefully something comes out of the correspondence with the BBC. I see that as a requirement almost, that they should be getting involved in that, given the seriousness of this issue, and I'd love to see that pursued. Just to come back to your last point, David, then about the social media campaign, certainly when previous ones have been run, whether it was, don't use your mobile phone whenever that became a legal issue, or the horrific images we used to see and they lasted with you, you felt like you were being targeted, you felt like there was a constant cycle of trying to reinforce this message. Will we going forward, and will young people particularly going forward feel like they are being targeted in a way to try and prevent this and raise awareness? Is that the plan?
We certainly hope so. I think the challenge is you
can't avoid it effectively.
But sorry?
Well, you're not able to avoid the message almost, is what I'm trying to get to.
That's the ideal scenario. Okay. Unfortunately, say the challenge is that with a lot of the social media apps, there's algorithms in there that determine what people can and can't see, and that's down to the person as opposed to the outlet, if you like, that's sharing that. And there's that scroll option. Yeah. So I do think it's a challenge, and it's something we are certainly looking at, and there's a lot of learning still in that realm.
Okay. And the last point, Chair, the Sam Donaldson raised his belief that we should be looking at both fines and the penalty points aspect of it. Is there any engagement that the department has done through consultation with stakeholders, PSNI, Road Safety Partnership around that aspect? Is that something that's being looked at, given those comments?
Not as yet, and I'm aware that Mr. Donaldson did sort of suggest that the fines aren't appropriate. I suppose the question is, what is an appropriate fine? There's certainly been discussion that the increase in the fines and the penalty points for mobile phone use, as an example, is something that would make it, or sorry, careless driving, is something that would have made a difference. So nothing's off the table, but we haven't had those conversations just yet.
And that becomes an issue about, so DOJ lead on the issue of sentencing and fines and stuff. So that's, and I know that's an issue that I think DOJ are turning their mind to. So the issue about, sentencing and fining review is, it becomes, so within what we can do quickly to address it is to try and get the message about going dry, and Sam was promoting the Chief Inspector was, or Chief Superintendent was promoting the fatal 5 and about messaging that. So that certainly is an aspect that can play in, but within our reach now and within our capability now, we know what that is that we do, and that is, so all of that, anything we can do that we can make a difference.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and we have also raised that with the Department of Justice as well, just to try and get some information on that. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for your presentation. We all appreciate the funding challenges and also the ongoing work, and I do welcome the strategy. I think it's something we can all buy into. Safe people, roads and vehicles, are 3 good central basic themes to keep focused on. Just a couple of questions. The KSI figures were released last week, which were quite alarming in terms of the 377 people killed or seriously injured in collisions due to alcohol and drugs. I suppose I was just keen to know what more do you folks feel can be done to improve these figures in conjunction with the PSNI and Justice Department as well?
So the Minister has asked officials to go away and look at the issues of drink and drug driving and mobile phones. So that's something that the Minister has asked us to have a look at, so specifically, so which will address those issues. So we're beginning to work with the Minister on that until he's sort of worked his way through.
But is there anything further on that? Obviously these are very alarming statistics, and one of the biggest factors about why we have the shocking statistics that we have. Is there any more you can expand on that at this point in terms of action points around?
So there is legislation in the public domain which looks at changing the drink drive penalties and the drink drive options. That's been on the statute book since 2016, and so there are options available in that will look at, for example, reducing the blood alcohol limits that people can have, and the Minister has asked us to go away and look at what can be done in that space. So there's legislation available. It contains the options for example, to reduce the blood alcohol limit for professional and new drivers to 20 milligrams rather than 80. The problem is that the detection equipment to pick up that isn't available. So there's the bit where the real world, we need to look at. So the Minister has asked what we can do, but people know they shouldn't drink and drive. And Sam, whenever he was given his evidence, was saying, he is sick, sore and tired. People going, so how many drinks can I have?
Yeah.
So people know they shouldn't be doing this. People know they shouldn't be taking drugs and getting behind the wheel. What we can do is look at those aspects and stuff like that, but there is an element of going, people are aware, and it's the behaviour that people are choosing to undertake, is that it's being looked at and it's being actively pursued.
Yeah.
So
it's that balance of awareness and education, but also consequences as well.
Yes, yeah.
Where the legislation comes in.
It'd be worth just expanding on that. So whilst we've got this strategy that's produced, it's the action plan that follows is going to be critical to what we do going forward. And when we look at the action plan, for example, for last year, and we're just finalising the report on that, there's lots of good work that's being done as business as usual, but people are still dying on the roads. So we have to do more. That's critical. What we're able to do through the likes of the report on the drink, drug, drive is gather evidence. And what we want to now work out is what we do with that evidence. The communication is one part of it. And we have the comms on drink driving, and they're reiterated. And you'll always see the campaign around Christmas time. So we know also when people are more likely not to be caught with alcohol or drugs in their system, and then the police use that information to determine when and where they're going to do those enforcement programs. So when we start using all that information, it's how we then sit down and say, well, what does the action plan look like that going forward? And that's the part then that Mr. Hughes was looking at, is in terms of how we drive that going forward.
Appreciate that, thank you. Just in terms of the limited service that we've had on roads maintenance over the last number of years, what impact do you feel that has on these alarming and shocking statistics here today? And we think of things, we're all regularly contacted as local representatives about potholes and poor condition of our roads, and I think sometimes it's overlooked that it just affects car users. It affects cyclists, motorcyclists and pedestrians. So what impact in terms of you feel that has had?
I'll ask Liam, but just before I ask Liam to come in there, we know that that's not the cause of fatalities. So the condition of the roads
collisions as well, it does,
there's a difference between collisions and fatalities. So
it all comes under road safety.
It all completely does. Yeah. So absolutely. So people are more likely to. There's more likely to be a fatality when people are driving quickly. For example, so speeds and issues on that. So we are aware that is an issue, and it causes problems, and that it's not directly linked to road deaths in a massive way. It's back to that 95% of it is road user behaviour. So within that context, it's very, very clear it is what road users, both drivers, pedestrians, passengers, cyclists, are doing that is causing that. But Liam, if you'd like to comment on the limited maintenance.
I take your point, Chris, in terms of that, but yeah, safe roads is an important aspect of the strategy, and maybe also pick up on the Chair's point previously just about maintenance budget or budgets generally in terms of those sorts of things. But yeah, in terms of safe roads, making sure that our road network is in a safe condition is a key part of contributing to road safety. So absolutely, and that's in terms of the integrity of the road surface, the roadsides, and markings and signage along those sorts of things. So it is a key aspect of what we're doing, and you're right in terms of the limited service maintenance that we have in place for the past number of years. I think it's in 2015. It has had an adverse impact on the condition of our roads. Many of our roads are in a poor condition. We have been severely under-resourced in terms of being able to maintain our roads to the standard that, from an engineering point of view, we would ideally like to do so. However, where many of our roads might be in a poor condition, our analysis of the road safety statistics would suggest that there's no direct correlation between that. So whilst they might be in a poor road condition, we will continue to prioritise our activities and our funding to make sure that poor road condition doesn't materialise in an unsafe road condition. But in terms of your point earlier on, Chair, about budgets, I do have some figures here in terms of the maintenance budget now, and I appreciate this is only a proportion of the department's overall budget, but 2019-20, our structural maintenance outturn was 106 million. 2020-21 it was 100 million. 21-22 it was 105, and last year it was a provisional outturn of about 120. Now, those are large numbers. I would just reiterate that that still represents a significant underinvestment in what is required. In today's prices, an independent assessment says that we should be investing approximately £191 million. So those are large numbers. Those are large proportions of the department's capital budget. There's a flat enough profile in terms of investment over the past 5 years with a slight upturn in last year, but that still represents a significant underinvestment, and ideally what we would want to be investing in road maintenance.
Okay, Stephen?
Just finally, very briefly, just in terms of the map within the strategy on the European road deaths, I think it is interesting just that we are ironically in the better end of that. Just a line or two in terms of internationally beyond Europe. Is there any other best practice or
So
how do we sit in the rest of the world terms?
we have to balance the line between the positive message in terms of how well we're doing worldwide, but avoid complacency. So it's very important that we don't lose sight of the fact that people are dying on our roads. But from an international perspective, we're doing incredibly well. The statistics that we have are come from different sources, so there's slightly different measurements, but I'll give you a couple. The World Health Organization pulled together all the worldwide stuff, and this is based on 100,000 inhabitants per 100,000 inhabitants or deaths. Globally, there's been 16.7 deaths. The best performing area is Europe, 7.4 deaths per 100,000. The next best is Americas, which is 15.3, so it's double. The worst performance Africa, which is 27.2. And then you've got sort of Southeast Asia and so forth in there in between. So I think what that does is that shows us that then when we're looking at the global, Japan and Singapore are very, very high performing, but actually the best are Norway, Sweden, Switzerland. So we look locally in terms of European. When we look at European then, the statistics flip slightly. So it's then around, it's deaths per 1 million population. Norway's best performing with 21.4. UK's third, 25.8, and the Republic of Ireland sixth, 30.8. We've had to do some calculations because Northern Ireland's linked in with UK, but we're sitting at 28.8. And by context, the highest is Romania, 85.8. So when we look at the countries that are all below 35, it's Norway, Sweden, UK, Denmark, Switzerland, Ireland, Germany, Finland. They're all wealthy nations. So I think actually, and again, I want to avoid complacency, but we're probably punching above our weight, really.
Yeah.
But where that's really important is when we were looking at the revision of the road safety strategy, the question we had to ask is, we've got a strategy in draft form, people are still dying, is this the right strategy? And when we look at the global context, it is the right strategy. And when we look at those that are doing really well and we ask why they're doing well, it's because they've had a strategy, they're continuing through it. It's the safe systems approach, it's the heavily focus on engineering, education, enforcement. So it's absolutely, we need to do better of what we're doing, but actually in general context, the strategy is the right way to go for us.
No, thank you. And just finally, Sam Donald, someone who was on that seat, said that no country has got it perfect yet. Exactly. I think that's an important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
Chair, just keep getting more and more questions. It's normally the opposite way. Thank you, gents, and thanks for coming along and for the presentation. I suppose it is good news that the executive have approved a road safety strategy. However, it'll be something of a Pyrrhic victory unless there's an adequate or appropriate budget line approached to go with it. We're all, I suppose, in agreement that we want to get to zero. We're on the road to zero, but if we don't put fuel in the vehicle, we ain't going to get anywhere near it. I suppose the fear currently expressed, I think, by a few members is that we have to make sure that we're actually going in the right direction and not reversing due to a lack of investment across the board. Now, you mentioned there, Chris, I suppose, legislative options that were available. I think we discussed these briefly before, and items that were on the statute book since 2016. You mentioned that specifically in regard to drink driving legislation and limits, but there are other tools, I suppose, on that menu. Has there been much sort of exploration around dusting down the GDL and things like that had been approved at that time by the Assembly after extensive consultation, extensive work by officials, the committee of the day and others? I mean, at the time this was being held up as the way forward, as a model of good practice, but it's gone nowhere.
So the Minister has asked us to look at that. That's another one of the options that the Minister has asked us to look at. So we're looking at what can be done on that specific issue.
Are you aware of any particular reason why that has sat on the shelf since 2016? Do you know, is it, I suppose, the fact that we haven't had an Assembly for 5 out of the past 8 years or more, won't have helped. I'm not asking you to make a political judgment on that, but
Thank you for that.
I mean, there is stuff that would require ministerial sign-off and direction there, but that combined with, I suppose, the budget situation regards maintenance that we've heard that has also been particularly impacted when we don't have an assembly, don't have the luxury or safety net of monitoring rounds. The combined impact of that has been disastrous for road safety.
So introducing graduated driver licences will take an investment of funding, capital funding, so that is absolutely an issue in itself, and it does take decisions and leadership. It also requires the DVA to be able to operationally plan for and deliver that, and by the way, their commitment to graduated driver licensing is absolute. But what it does is it takes the circumstances to say that's a priority for you, here's the funding to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. If you look at graduated driver licensing, again, to take the perspective that David has just shared with us, which is to look at it internationally, there are many aspects of what countries recognise as graduated driver licensing that we already have in. So, for example, we have got a structured and systematic driving test that includes hazard perception. We have got rules of the road in the highway code. So there are many parts of that what graduated. There are elements of it that other parts of the world have brought in that we don't have. So we're partly where there simply by the arrangements we have in place, but those bits they take investment and decisions and time and to do that. And the Minister has asked us specifically to go in and look at what is possible for that.
And the evidence exists of how well or otherwise those pieces.
So it's really interesting. So that's actually a really good question, and one that I looked into. So other parts of the world have brought in graduated driving licensing in the 1980s and 1990s. So in the parts of the US, but then because they've got a federal system and it's state driven, they can be quite different. So the evidence is not what you would anticipate. There was research done looking at how it would impact in Northern Ireland. And as you would expect, basically the more elements that you bring in, for example, a curfew for newly qualified drivers, a longer extended restricted period, every single bit of it helps. But it's difficult to disentangle the percentages of that. But what we do know is that those elements will help a lot, because what they do is they help encourage better behaviour of driver behaviour, and they support young drivers to get the experience on the road. It's a two-part issue. So the issue is that there is much more time and a much more structured investment in training drivers to get the experience they need before they sit and pass their driving test. So the GDL will allow drivers to be trained on motorways, learner drivers to be trained on motorways, trained in the safe use of sat-navs and things like that, the modern driving environment that they're in. So they'll have a much more structured driving instruction period, and then they will have a period where they're more supported to gain the experience to be safe drivers after that, because we do know that young drivers are disproportionately represented in particularly in fatal collisions, and you'll know from the news yourself that that's the case. So that is being looked at as what we can do on that. That's now the Minister has asked officials to look at that.
Sorry, Mark, if it's helpful. Last week we did ask the Minister in relation to this, and we did have a letter back last week, and we are asking for a briefing specifically on the options that the Minister is going to be looking at. So we are going to be looking more into this, because it is important in relation to the Road Traffic Amendment Act. So
super. And then on the budget issue, I remember a time when, I'm not sure if it was a formal agreement or just an understanding within the executive that road safety was sacrosanct, and the road safety budget within the Department of Environment at the time, specifically in terms of advertising, was ring-fenced. Now, those days are gone, but other members and yourselves have accepted and understood the importance of advertising and lacked, or sort of lamented the lack of advertising and information we've been able to get out there. It's important that we are able to get a bigger bang for a smaller buck. If you like, and mention had been made about social media as a better way, or maybe more effective way to reach younger people. But when you were talking there about, I suppose, getting political leaders and others on board, I'm not sure how influential we are with anyone, let alone younger people. Had any work been done to maybe identify or get on board influencers, who might, I suppose, be able to relate better, or that young people will relate better to?
Yes, so specifically I know that the communications team have been looking very much at that aspect, and I mentioned earlier that we do have the 3 sporting codes who have all been engaged in that. So rugby, football and soccer and GAA have all been involved in promoting the messages, and in talking carefully about this with our communications team, what they would recognise is that particularly for young people, you get a message and then you've got the value from that, so you can't keep going back and going, well, there's that same soccer player or there's that same GAA star. You need to keep finding new ways of doing that. So it's a particular challenge that the communication team are very, very conscious of, and looking at seeing what they can do, conscious of the fact that their audience are going to be looking for something that they haven't seen before. So it's very much a part of the thinking.
And then just finally, Chair, just to say about how much of this, regardless of how much money is spent, how much effort's put in, whatever legislation you have, however much advertising you do, a lot of this comes down to luck as well. And if we look at the KSI figures, well, last year was horrific, absolutely horrific, in terms of the number of lives lost. One life lost is horrific, but the numbers have been going in the wrong direction for a couple of years now. But then if you look at the number of people seriously injured, it had reduced. So at times there's such a fine line, and I think it underscores the fragility really of human life.
I think that's a really important message, because we always say nobody goes out and makes a conscious decision to kill themselves or kill other people, but people do make a conscious decision to lift the phone or make a conscious decision to go a little bit heavy on the accelerator. There's lots of conscious decisions that contribute to it, but nobody believes, I think this is a point that Mr. Donaldson was reiterating last week, nobody believes it's going to happen to them or their families. And I think the message that we really, really need to push is that people need to take personal responsibility. The people that are going to save lives are the people that are out using the roads. When we talk about whether it comes down to luck, in some instances it absolutely is luck, and it's lucky that people come away from some of those collisions, but it's those conscious decisions, and I think that's the conversation that we need to have at a societal level, is what are individuals doing to avoid collisions, what decisions are they making, and there's a wee part of technology that will help with that in the future. You've got all these mechanisms within vehicles that tell you you're drifting across a lane, that stop you using your phone and so forth, but actually it's people's decision making. People choose to switch off those things. People choose to switch off the little beep that tells them when they're speeding.
Finally, just on that,
yes,
I suppose,
finally.
engineering aspect, it just came into my head as you were talking about some of the modifications, I suppose, are things that are in cars now that weren't in cars in years gone by. Has any issue been highlighted, for want of a better expression, around headlamps? I'm not alone. First I attributed to just getting older. They seem to be brighter and more dazzling on the road, but other people have shared some of the
construction use
concerns.
issue, which is dealt with at DFT level, and they are looking at it because it has raised as a question, are they getting brighter? I don't know enough detail behind it, but I know that obviously we're all linked in with the UK-wide construction use that is being looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good point, because at night time it is. I do notice it, but
Sorry, I've just
Be just us all getting a wee bit older, though, that's the problem,
speak for
I
yourself.
wasn't going to say anything. Seriously, David.
Thanks, Mark. Danny?
Thank you, Chair, and thank yous. I'm just wondering, last year was a 8-year high. We're saying we're double already this year. Is there, we know human behaviour, the big player, what's the data saying about what has really changed in a couple of years that we're on the increase rather than the decrease?
All the data is pointing towards inattention. There's nothing. So the way it works is, once you have a collision that results in a fatality or a serious injury, the police investigation unit, who do an absolutely unspeakable job. I mean, I don't know how those individuals, and fair play to them, and we're thankful for them, but they pull together the information which then we'll use to try and determine what communications, what policy, etc. decisions we make. over the last lot of years, it's been the increase in figures, but it's roughly the same things. It's inattention. I mean, the PSNI report, which was published there a couple of weeks ago, has highlighted the top principal causation factors. Now, principal causation factors is the one that's circled number 1, but there's other causation factors. So, for example, we know that speed is a key causation factor, but it's not the principal causation factor regularly. But it's inattention or attention diverted, driving too close, emerging from a minor road without care, impairment, alcohol or drugs, that's either driver or rider, crossing or entering the road junction without care, turning right without care, overtaking on the offside without care, wrong course position, changing lane without care, and having excessive speed with having regard to conditions. So these are all human error. So it's absolutely falling back to the 96%. The key message here is roads are not killing people, vehicles are not killing people, people are killing people.
Yeah.
Having said that, we need to keep our eye on all 3 aspects, because if we entirely turn our focus to people, then the other things can be slipped. But yeah, you're right, the numbers are going up, but the actual factors aren't. So it's about identifying those and focusing on those. And we do refer to inattention or careless driving because there's so many elements there that fall under that category.
Yeah.
You know.
I suppose of international best practice, we touched on it, and something that Mark that came into my head there was about manufacturers and the key part that they could play to influence to reduce our bad behaviours, I suppose. But the fact that you can turn things off, is there design out there, or is there engagement out there that the manufacturers that stops, or even to the point where, get in, you don't put your seatbelt on, if you forget it, your car would beep until you put it back on. Are we going in a place that you can't start a car if your mobile phone's on or anything like that there?
I think we're getting much better. There are international standards for car manufacturing that have to be followed. The car manufacturers will make commercial decisions. You'll go into a car showroom and you'll have your different levels of the vehicle, and the safety features seem to improve the more you pay. There's something inherently wrong there, and there's something perhaps we need to have a think there, but we can't influence that here. I think that's a global issue, to be honest.
So on the issue about and you've got the difference between vehicle assist or driver assist tools, which help you be aware that you're speeding, for example. So on the issue of speed, for example, there's now a new driver assist information system which will uses GPS and camera scanning to alert you to what the speed limit is. So if you're going from a 50 to a 40 to a 30 zone, it will tell you that. Now, because the driver assist, they turn on each time you turn the vehicle ignition on, but you can turn them off. However, whenever you turn the vehicle ignition off and turn it back on again, it resets. So you have to actually. So in practice, what happens is people go, "I'm not having that," and they turn on, and then by time 12, they're fed up because they've stopped at the shops and they've done all that. So even those people who are determined to turn those systems off end up behind people who actually have those systems and are now following so you get the interface between the technology impacting with people, and the people who turn it off are those who are perhaps less concerned about driving within it, but they're in a society where other people are being helped to do that. So there's a curious interface. David said there's commercial decisions. Our car market here is tiny, but we're impacted by what happens on a global level to vehicle standards and vehicle development. So they all play in. But as David said, the more you pay, sometimes the more safety features you get.
Yeah, and the last question, I'm trying to think outside the box. A lot of the questions were asked. I suppose there's a place on the table here for insurance companies as well. Like anybody renewing their insurance in this last wee while has seen it. Like, I haven't had an accident, my insurance has went up. Is there a role for them to play that can?
So the cost of insurance is something that we're asked about quite regularly, and it's more of a commercial decision and it's regulated, by other ones. Our input as a department is to reduce the number of collisions, because ultimately it's uninsured drivers and collisions and claims, which is what's driving up all of our costs. So if we can tackle that, and if we can reduce, there are other benefits to the road safety strategy beyond saving lives. There's economic benefits, there's environmental benefits, because we'll be creating an environment that will encourage people to walk and to cycle and to use all the active travel routes. So whilst we're focusing very heavily here on road deaths and things like that, there's wider benefits, economic benefits. If we can reduce collisions, we'll reduce premiums. They're both linked. And also, again, can technology. So we have a meeting with the Association of British Insurers around trying to gather information around black boxes. Do black boxes reduce collisions? Is that, if we measure the amount of collisions by age groups and by gender types and things like that, and then we take all that data and then assess it against those that have black boxes, is there market difference? How we use that information then, I don't know. It's obviously then about how we use that data to drive forward policy and decision making. But it's all on the calendar for work.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for all the response so far, as I'm sort of actually ticking off answers as I go along here, so it sort of speaks to the clarity of the presentation. I think Mr. Mullen makes a profound point just regarding safety features and price points. Just to go back to sort of the driver licences, and I'm trying to be brief, but I'm trying to tie in some of the answers that have already come. You essentially mentioned the novice driver as the most at-risk demographic, and I can understand that as, I'm going to have 2 children coming up as well, and you're trying to make the point that, anyway. Sort of following on from the graduated licences, in other areas you have to have CPD with your driving licences, and someone that would have driven in a previous role out of benefited from CPD. Is that, and given as well that during the training and licensing stage is probably when we talked about influencers and stuff, but whenever you're doing the training and the licenses, that's when you have the most attention of some of these people that are wanted. Is that something that could be? Would that something that would drive things? Would bring things down? Is that something that would affect it? Is that something that's being considered? It was more on listening to the points you're making and sort of tying them in my own head. Sorry.
So it's a really fascinating question, and it's one that so once people get their driving licence, they are left to their own devices as to whether they choose, for example, to do an advanced driving course. And if you do that, you can, for example, perhaps get lower insurance premiums. It becomes a political decision in many ways, because I know, for example, and it's one of the areas that we do cover in the department, the issue around driver licensing for people whenever they start to get older is very impassioned, and so it's an area we haven't looked into it. It's a very interesting thought to look into it. I suspect it would be one that would it might be tricky territory to get into. It's how people behave when they have their licences. If somebody has a drink or speeds, they know they shouldn't do that. But it's a really, really interesting point.
I think it is worth saying though that obviously they are in place for commercial drivers. So those drivers that are on the road more often and so forth, they've got the CPD for them. But as Chris said, big societal impact to ask people to pay and to be retested and retrained and so forth.
I'm sort of thinking that there could not be some sort of, again, a graduate. I mean, not talking about the same extreme as what the CPD is, but again, some sort of not revalidation, but sort of, I don't know, it was more the point that you made of this carelessness. You're trying to influence them, but how can you guarantee that they're influenced? So
where you might see an example of that is where people do then get an opportunity, if they're caught speeding, for example, to undertake the course as opposed to take the penalty points. And those courses are there exactly for that purpose, just to reiterate all those messages. So I suppose it's there to a degree, but I take your point.
And as when we look at the data about the age of the people involved in causing collisions, we do know that as people become more experienced drivers, they are much less likely to cause a collision. There's experience in it. It just we look at it by age, by age profiles, and younger people. So I mean, the point that Mark was making about improving training for drivers and stuff like that, is is perhaps something we know we can look at. So it is, as David said, it would become a societal conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just can I very briefly just pick up on just a few points. Just in terms of drink driving, and you sort of discussed there about some of the things that you're looking at in relation to the causation of that. I'm just wondering, has there been any engagement with TransLink in terms of the lack of nighttime transport and also the taxi industry in terms of, you know, provision at night for getting home, you know, if you're out socially, you know, that could be part of the cause of people going, oh, like, you know, difficult to get home, I'll just drive home.
Yeah, so there's extensive engagement between TransLink and which is another part of the department, and the taxi industry, which is me. I was meeting them yesterday afternoon, in fact, and you know, we are quite conscious about the issue about availability of all those services, and potentially it does, but at the end of the day, people know they shouldn't drink and drive. It's really is personal responsibility, and it is that straightforward, you know. And yes, it might help, but I mean, what we have within, you know, within our target is the fact people don't do this, just don't do that.
It really is as simple, isn't it?
It is.
Just a question in relation to the action plan, linked to the strategy. So, I take it you will be able to provide some detail in relation to the action plan with Assembly committees for 2024-2025, and whether, you know, there'll be an opportunity for committees to express their views as well. Yeah,
Absolutely. It's we'd welcome the opportunity to.
yeah.
Once it's done, obviously the budget process and the budget setting process has worked its way through, and now the action plans are being taken as those. It's the action plan, quite deliberately and consciously, is contributed to by all the key players. So we'll have PSNI, we'll have Department of Justice, we have Department of Health through the Fire and Rescue Service and the Ambulance Service. All those players are contribute to the plan, as well as we're majors, and you know, our colleagues in road safety, colleagues in roads who do. I think I'd like to make the point. The reason why roads don't contribute is because roads are doing a good job on making sure they don't. And you know, to pick up Liam's point, they fix the worst defects which might cause fatalities. All of those things are being pulled together, and they will going into the action plan. So it's being drawn together at the moment as people work through that. And of course, we would welcome the opportunity to make ourselves available to the committee to discuss that.
And the other committees as well, such as health, for example, or, you know, all of those committees. And then just detail on the timescales for the completion of the report on 2023-2024 action plan. Again, will this be shared with ourselves?
Yeah, so we are finalising, but getting that cleared at the minute. It's a factual report. It's measuring success or otherwise against the actions that were there, and then doing an assessment of that. Again, making the point that people are down in the roads, so it's a retrospect on last year, and then focus on the year coming up.
So it'll be published. It'll be published and
well, I think we over the next couple of weeks it's there for clearance at the minute.
Yeah, so it's in the process of that report being.
So in the next 4 weeks.
I would say that confidently,
yeah. I'm slightly hesitating because we're in a pre-election period, but I think probably just whenever it's done. So yeah.
And that'll be published?
Yes.
Will the committee have sight of that before it's published?
I can get away and see what the.
Yeah, it would be good just if the committee could have some sight of that just before it is published.
See what
yeah, if we can. Thank you. Keith, you'd indicated there just if.
Thanks, gentlemen, for coming along. Just two or three questions. This strategy we're looking at obviously up to 2030.
Yeah.
Have we a strategy today?
Yes, it's been approved by the executive. So
no, but I mean the one we're working today. So have we got previous strategy?
Right. This strategy was in draft format, and it's published in draft format. All that we've done now is revisit it, revised it. To make
when was that published in draft, roughly?
In October 22. In October 2022, it was
But
brought.
prior to that, had we a strategy?
With the strategy until 2020,
Right.
which was rolled forward as a political decision
effectively,
because of COVID.
this is the new strategy. So what's the difference between this one and the old one, the one we're currently sitting under?
So the basic approach is the same.
The approach is the same. What we did during the revision process was ask ourselves that question. Is the approach on the safe systems the correct approach? Is the focus on vehicles, people, roads, is that the right approach? Are the targets correct and so forth? And the outcome of that was that was the right trajectory, so we've retained it. So there's very, very little change.
I don't mean this disrespectful at all, but it's a little bit of a copy and a paste with a tweak.
No, well, so it's so what's in there, but that would, I think, diminish the amount of challenge we did to making sure that what was in there was actually the right thing. And to get back to the point David made earlier, the people who are doing really well internationally have got this approach and they've stuck with it. So we challenged to make sure that this was the approach. We did extensive engagement on the and there was a consultation. There was extensive engagement. We discussed it with. We looked at the international evidence, the issues that David has raised. We specifically spoke to PSNI, DOJ, Fire Rescue Service, Police and Community Safety Partnerships, the RHA, Motorcycle Action Group, Cycling Ulster, SUSTRANS, MTAC. We spoke to those.
Let's say it's. I appreciate the copy and paste. It's maybe not the best comment, but let's say you've tweaked it or modified it.
We've verified it was legitimate.
So if we had to pick this last 2 years and we're following the same approach with less money, how's this going to work?
So that's the challenge.
The action plan's critical to that.
The action plan is.
At the very opening remarks, you made the point about 95% people.
Yeah.
We can't get people to stop throwing tins of Red Bull out of the windows, and there's all the drinks available. So we can't get people to stop throwing crisp bags out of the windows, McDonald's wrappers out of the windows. We can't get them to do that, and that theoretically doesn't cause fatalities, or it shouldn't do. Yeah. How are we going to get them to listen? Because travelling to Belfast 10 years ago, and you're in the wrong lane, and you indicated you were let in. That's not the case today. So people is your problem. Is that what we're saying?
That's absolutely.
Because people's blaming the roads and they're blaming everybody else but themselves. So how do we change people?
I think that's absolutely the challenge. And the action plan then we look to develop over the next year and going forward, we have to be pragmatic and we have to adjust the action plan to deal with the issues at hand. So the action plan at the minute's a 1 year plan. We're going to have the business as usual activity, setting out what we are doing to improve road safety. But we've also got to support that with the bigger strategic items. A big part of that's obviously education. People are
anybody,
so it's,
and I'm not writing off a generation, but anybody from 18 on, do we say waste of time having the conversation?
Absolutely.
Oh gosh, no.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely no.
So do we start at P1? Because how does Norway do it in Switzerland? They don't throw the rubbish at the windows. They have a clean country and they broadly follow the rules. So do we start at P1?
Yeah. So, the earlier you start, the better, and we're well aware that children as influencers on the behaviour of their parents is a massively strong. It was used very effectively in stop smoking campaigns. So what you're saying is absolutely and frankly, if you have ideas that we are not considering, the degree to which we would welcome
the narrative I hear on social media every day is, and the statistics proved that the last Mr. Donaldson was here, 288 deaths in the previous 5 years. 4 of them were relevant to the road. 4. But people saying it was the road.
Yes, absolutely.
So people don't even understand. No, you were flying on the road.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Just very lastly, the Motorcycle Action Group are coming up to the committee.
Yes.
Road safety strategy, the draft road safety strategy, do you feel that there was enough input and consultation from every stakeholder, every group that has?
Well, certainly, yes, it would be obviously what we set out to do, and we got 62 formal responses plus a lot of informal ones. I know certainly that the Motorcycle Action Group specifically came to 3 of our public, certainly 2, and I think all 3 of the public forum that I had, plus that we had. Plus, I met specifically with them at the time of in a separate meeting simply for that group, because obviously they are vulnerable road users, so they have certainly been that you raised have certainly been extensively consulted, and I'm very aware of what issues they raised. In particular, they were keen on public funding for further training for motorcyclists. And as people who are responsible for driver licensing. The challenge we have is going, well, obviously public funds, that's a political decision as to whether that's, but public funds are a scarce and precious thing. And, once something is above the minimum standard required, so are you saying that the standard that we have at this point in time for motorcycle licensing isn't adequate? And the answer to that was, well, yes, it is. We don't want to make that harder. So, then there's an ask about, and then throughout the highway code, of course, is writ large about how the, how other road users should treat vulnerable users such as cyclists, pedestrians, motorcyclists are in there. So yes, they were extensively consulted, as part of this. And
just to give some reassurance there as well, that's not the end of the consultation. We've set up a framework to assist with delivery of this strategy over the coming years, and that framework has 3 layers. There's the strategic layer, which is the team the forum that Sam Donaldson was talking about before. So these are key decision makers across all of the partner organisations. They'll drive forward the direction. You've then got the tactical forum, which is the action group. All those actions that are going to be in the action plan or in the previous action plan. That's a quarterly meeting to assist each other, challenge each other, see how we can best work together to deliver those actions. And then we've got a range of operational fora, which will be picking up things like the Road Safety PR group, which is all of the communication strategies. We've got the Statistics and Analytics group, but also within that, we're going to be reactive to deal with emerging issues. So we know, for example, we want to engage with MTech, we know we want to engage with the cycling community, we know we want to engage with the motorcycling community. Once we've got the action plan, then we can drive forward how we then deliver those actions, and absolutely the likes of the Motorcycle Action Group will be part of in terms of motorcycles.
The conversation remains open.
Obviously, well, I'm glad to hear the conversation remains open. Obviously, we weren't privy to the conversations that happened in any meetings or whatever, but the Motorcycle Action Group in some of the correspondence that they've sent to the committee have levelled some criticism that they feel that none of what they brought forward was, their input wasn't included in relation to the draft road safety strategy. Would you like to make any comment? Do you feel that you were able to input their concerns into the road safety strategy in terms of some of their asks?
So absolutely, and specifically, their asks were vocally made, and they attended, as I said, all the public meetings and got a one-to-one session specifically afterwards. So we're very clear as to exactly what their views at the time were, and so there's we also engaged both with the local and with the national motorcycle group action, and certainly whenever the national group were involved, they were going, well, look, yes, certainly from a national point of view, looking at the various road safety approaches across, that they were quite content that that the voices were being listened to, and when they took that review across the plans. And I know that there are issues about funding was a main concern that was raised with us, and there was a desire for funding for additional training over and above the minimum requirement from the public purse for people who were riding motorcyclists. That was the key issue that was raised, and that's a matter of use of public funding, which is for an action plan rather than for the strategy, for one thing. And then when it goes into the action plan, it then becomes, is that a use of public funding? So from the strategic point of view, what I was keen to tease out was if there's an ask for further training, is the training that is required adequate for people to be able to conduct themselves and their motorbike or machine safely on the roads? And the answer to that was yes, it is. They were content. So strategically, I was involved, obviously, in that consultation. I was particularly keen to ensure that that aspect of it was something that was landed. And then what my understanding was of the ask was that it was for further funding from the public purse for training over and above the minimum requirement. Okay. So, and that was reflected from a series of 3 local conversations, possibly plus a fourth, and then one that was done at a national level with the Motorcycle Action Group, a representative from across the UK. So the voice has been certainly loud and well listened to, and very, very carefully considered.
Well, look, thank you. Just, you might not be able to give this to us in the committee right now, but I would like to see a breakdown of the funding specifically for advertising from the department's point of view over the last 8 years. Yeah. If you could provide that to the committee, that would be really, really useful. Because we have asked as well, just following on from the Deputy Chair's point, we have asked some broadcasters here in terms of the advertising to get some evidence just in relation to that. So if you could provide me some figures from the department's point of view.
Happy to, Chair.
Yeah, that would be great. Look, we've run over in time as per usual, but look, thank you very much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for the work that is going on in terms of road safety strategy here in Northern Ireland. Really appreciate it. So thank you.
For the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, members, is there anything anybody wants to pick up on just at this moment in time before we move on? All content? Yeah?
I think just around the funding, Chair, obviously there's an equality impact assessment underway at the minute and there's still an allocation, but I think the whole thing pivot, it really does depend on that.
It does.
So the strategy's all well and good, but if it's not achievable through funding, then we have a serious problem.
And we really need to be, whenever we're having our budget briefings, we really need to be drilling down into that, because in my view, you know, we see so many times strategies here in Northern Ireland that come out and sit in shelves, and you know, at the end of the day, these are people's lives here in Northern Ireland, so it does need to be adequately funded to make sure that we are meeting those outcomes and the targets that are contained within it. So
just on the, obviously I've raised it twice now about the national broadcaster and the role that they could play there. Is that something that the committee could follow up on? I'm conscious of the...
We have.
So we've written to them ourselves, did we?
We have, the letter has gone to the BBC. I'm still trying to get the appropriate person to write to a new TV, because I think there have been changes over the last recent years. Okay. But yes, the committee has agreed to write, so we will bring that information back.
Yeah. Okay. Content then, just if we could fly through some of the legislation, and then obviously at the end we're coming to our F5 session, okay? So item 8 is subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that one statutory rule not subject to assembly proceedings is at page 140 of the meeting pack. The rule is not subject to any assembly procedure and is not required to be laid. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the statutory rule. Content? Yeah. Item 9 is subordinate legislation, SL not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that there are 5 proposals, SL1 for statutory rules that are not subject to assembly proceedings, which can be found at page 146 to 155 of members' packs. The rules are not subject to assembly procedure and are not required to be laid. So I'm asking if members have any issues they wish to raise in the proposals. No? Okay, so are members content with the proposals for the statutory rules?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, item 10 is the budget 2024-25 Equality Impact Assessment Consultation. At pages 160 and 161, there's correspondence from the department and a copy of the public consultation document. At pages 198 and 235, you'll see section 75 screening analysis for both the resource and capital allocations. Inform members that following an evidence session on the budget allocations, the department has indicated, commenced with a public consultation on the equality implications of the indicative 2024-2025 budget allocations. Members, I have to be honest in terms of my view in relation to this. I'm disappointed, given we did have a budget session at TransLink departmental officials were asked in relation to the list of options to reduce resource spending and their forecasting. I'm disappointed that the committee did not receive evidence and some indication in relation to what was coming forward. Members will also be aware that when the committee was happening this last week, we'll have also seen in relation to the concessionary passes and one thing and another that was announced that the committee didn't have sight of beforehand, which I was really, really disappointed about, because certainly the committee should have a role in taking some scrutiny in relation to those announcements and measures. I don't know how members feel as well in relation to that, but that is my opinion. I just do not want that to be an ongoing scenario for this committee in which we're sidelined, and these announcements keep coming up and we have no sight of them beforehand. It's been an issue we've raised before in this committee. So, members, do you want to add to that? I see some people nodding there. Mark, do you want to come in?
No, well, thank you, Chair. I don't think you'd need to be Mystic Meg to know that there was going to be an announcement on the concessionary transport passes. I'd actually forecasted in my speech from the budget debate that I expected to hear something in the coming days or weeks in advance of an election.
Well done, Mark.
Congratulations. I do see, provisionally, I think I saw something from the Business Committee yesterday that the Infrastructure Minister is due potentially to make 2 statements, not next week, but the following week. So I don't know what goodies will be given out at that stage,
Yeah, and with that being said, we all knew that there was going to be an announcement. We all have asked questions on this. We've all talked about it in the chamber, but this is a committee that has a role for scrutiny, and therefore, regardless of that, we should be being made aware of this. We did have a budget session in which officials were clearly asked what is coming forward, what is potentially coming down the track. We were not told. And nobody can tell me that they did not know at that stage while we were sitting in TransLink having that discussion that they didn't know that that was going to come. That didn't just pluck out of thin air within a matter of a few days or a week. So I think it's important that we do put a line in the sand and say, this committee has a role here, and I would like us to have a role in some of the decision making around that. So I suppose at this stage, I'm asking members to note the correspondence at this stage. If Andrew, did you? Sorry,
I just broadly wanted to come in in support of that and agree with that. Again, being relatively wet behind the ears in this committee, I wasn't sure if it was the done thing, but it's good to hear that it shouldn't be the done thing. And I think as a committee, I think there's good to have sort of a collegiate approach to this in regards to scrutiny. So yeah,
we ask what those statements might be.
Yeah.
Because we've also had statements that have been given in the Assembly where we haven't received the statement until the Minister's actually been in the chamber.
And we've had debates where the media have got hold of what the Minister's decision making was before the debate even took place. And in relation to the MOT debate, although that seems to be a localised issue that happened, but an embargo was broken and we were sitting in the chamber where the announcement was being made on through the media before ourselves as members. So, I mean, this isn't how Assembly business should be done. So I think it's important that we do just set a straight agenda in relation to that as committee. We want to work with the Minister, but we also need to have that ability to scrutinise whatever's coming out of the department and feed into that.
I would echo that, Chair. I think we've been very constructive in terms
Yeah.
of our scrutiny, and we've worked hand in glove both with the Department and the Minister. So to that end, I think it's a bit of a slight on this committee. And I know that if the Minister was roles reversed and was sitting on this committee in his former role as a spokesperson for infrastructure, he would be making exactly the same argument, because I've heard him do it before. So
Yeah.
I think it's only right and proper that this committee is given its role and responsibility, and that, as you say, line in the sand, that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, members, so I'm also seeking agreement to request a copy of the report on the response to the consultation once it has concluded, which should include detail on any proposed changes in advance of any final decisions by the Minister. This will afford the committee sufficient opportunity to express any views it may have to inform any subsequent decisions by the Minister. You can tell with that approach? Yeah. And then I'm seeking agreement to highlight the request for the report to the Committee for Finance in the response to the correspondence item 6.5 at page 35 in the meeting pack, and advise the committee did not receive a copy of the consultation document in advance of its publication, in line with the requirements of the timescales for interaction between Assembly, committees and departments. So are you content with that? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Members, I'm moving now to the item 11, which is the forward work programme. At page 273 of the draft forward work programme, advise members, as discussed and agreed informally, there will be no meeting held on the 3rd of July. Those who were scheduled to give evidence on that date have been contacted, and the sessions will now be arranged for September. And an indicative work programme for September onwards will be in the pack next week for members to consider. Time flies when you're having fun. So I'm seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme. Content? Hard to believe we're looking into next year already. So item 12, before we move on to our A5 briefing, does any members have any other business that they wish to raise at this stage? No? All content? Okay. So just from completion, if we have to move obviously into closed session just in our next session, the date, time and location of the next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 26th of June 2024 in this room 29 in Parliament Buildings. So the last item on our agenda is A5 Western Transport Corridor Scheme. The next steps and indicative timings, and this is our oral evidence briefing session. And just to remind members that the committee did agree that due to some sensitivities we may have to conduct some of the evidence in closed session today. So at page 277 is the written evidence. Department for Infrastructure hopefully will not be in closed session for too long today, and if necessary we obviously will do that. So what I'm proposing to do, just for the officials that have joined, is will allow yourselves to brief us for about 5 minutes or so, and then I'll come to members' questions. If there are questions that you feel need to be addressed within closed session, if you could indicate that, we'll keep that question to the end. I want to try and obviously make sure that we have as much in the public domain as possible, but we will keep those questions aside, and we will go into closed session and deal with it then, if you're content with that approach. Yeah. So we're just welcoming to the committee today Colin Woods, Deputy Secretary of the Transport and Roads Asset Management, Department for Infrastructure. We've Colin Hutchinson to the committee today, Director of A5 and Active Travel, Department for Infrastructure. And we've Seamus Keenan, Deputy Director of the A5 Department for Infrastructure. And as per usual, I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard while in public session, if members are content. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for coming to the committee today. We're very keen to hear from you in relation to the A5 specifically. So I'll allow you obviously to talk to it for about 5 minutes, and then I'll come to members' questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to give you a briefing on the A5. You'll be well aware of the safety history with the A5 and the accident history with the A5. There's been a significant collision history, and between April 2006 and April 2024, there have been unfortunately 57 fatalities on that stretch of road. The A5 Western Transport Corridor will provide 85 kilometres of high quality dual carriageway along that western corridor. It will save lives, and it will also have a major impact on the economic opportunities along that western corridor as well. It runs from new buildings, as you I'm sure are well aware, to the border just south of Auchnacloy. I think it's important just to, in open session here, to highlight that no decision has been taken yet by the Minister on how the scheme will proceed. So we are very significantly limited in what we can say in open session, but once the decision is taken, we'd be more than happy to come back again and go through in whatever level of detail in open session that the committee would like us to do, and hopefully you'll appreciate the legal issues around that and why we are constrained today in open session. In open session, what I propose to do, if the chair is content with it, is to hand over to Seamus to take you through the history of the scheme, so that everybody appreciates just how we've got to where we are today on it. And once Seamus is finished, I'll just close our opening remarks with just the time frame for moving the scheme forward over the coming months.
Yeah. If you don't mind briefly speaking to the history, because members, I'm sure, around this table will be quite well briefed in relation to the issues and the problems, but if you can just speak to it briefly.
Yeah, I'll do that now then, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can here. So the A5 obviously is an executive project. It has its origins in the St Andrews Agreement, and was agreed through the NSMC back as far as 2007. And at that time there was an intent from the Irish government to contribute €400 million towards that and to fund other major roads within Northern Ireland. So the first public inquiry was in 2011 when the orders were made, the vesting order, direction order. There was then a legal challenge to that in 2012, the Alternative A5 Alliance, and that led to the quashing of the orders then in early 2013. So after that, there were lessons learned in terms of habitats regulations, which is what the case fell down on, and we moved towards a new environmental statement then in 2016, February 2016. Michelle McElveen was the minister at that time. So that led to an inquiry in October 2016 over a 2-week period, and that was held by the PAC as well. So their report came out from that in May 2017, and we moved towards a new decision to proceed at that point, towards the end of 2017, and at that time there were no ministers in place, so the Permanent Secretary of the day, Peter May, made the decision to proceed with the scheme in November 2017. But again, that was met by a legal challenge by the EA5A, which came into us in December 2017. So during 2018, the Department actually was required to concede that challenge, and that was because the main ground of challenge was on the decision-making powers of the Permanent Secretary at that time, and that was what was challenged. And given other court of appeal hearings that were heard that year in 2018, we decided that there was no point in going into court with this, that it was going to lose. So that was dropped, and again the orders were quashed at that time. So our theory was at that time it would get a new environmental statement and another addendum out for a new decision by another minister then in 2019. So we published that addendum in March 2019. But again, there was 264 representations made at that time, and so we had to go into another public inquiry. And that public inquiry then was held in February and March of 2020, again by the PAC. In September 2020, the department received an interim report from the PAC on that inquiry, and it was recommended that we carry out some more work, and then we could reconvene the inquiry on the completion of that work. For us, that work took longer than we expected, to be fair to say. So ultimately that ended then in a new environmental statement addendum again, being published in 2022, with further information then in November 22 and most lately in January 23. So that led to the reconvened public inquiry then in May of 2023. So that concluded. May ended on the 2nd of June, I believe. PAC report from that then, the final PAC report we received on the 31st of October of last year. That contained 30 different recommendations, many of which were difficult for us and have taken considerable time and effort to get through, both legally and from an engineering perspective. But at this point in time now, we're well through those recommendations and we're moving now towards the Minister's decision.
Okay.
So just on following on from that there are still outstanding elements of work to be done, and they will be done over the summer, but at this point in time it's the intention to put papers, a series of papers up to the executive over the summer period, for them to see the detail, the complexity and the detail of the information that we'll be providing them, to give them an opportunity to understand and read through that detail, with the view of a decision to be taken later in the summer.
Okay. So you would envisage then the Minister's announcement towards the end of the summer? Yeah. Can I ask just a question around the funding? So just for clarity, can you give me the figures that have already been spent on the A5 project to date?
Yeah, that figure is around 110 million at this point.
And that includes legal costs?
All costs, from 2007 onwards. And
how confident are you in terms of the funding that is secured right now? We have the Irish government funding. You have funding that is secured, ring-fenced through the department. The Irish government contribution, when you take into account the increase in costs, it's actually down. It's 32% of the actual costs. It was, I think, at 47% originally. So in terms of costings going forward and the time scales, it has to be said, potential of further legal challenge. How confident are you in terms of the funding that is secured right now and the possibility that there may be a need for further funding?
So first of all, point out that it is an executive flagship scheme, so it should, with that status, be there should be more confidence around funding for it. With respect to actual numbers and contributions moving forward, that's still a piece of work that we're finalising, and those will be issues which will be put in front of the Minister and the Executive over the summer period, and will be fundamental, obviously, to the decision that's taken and how it moves forward. But I can't.
Yes, that's right at the heart of the Minister's decision that he needs to take in terms of how he wishes to proceed. And it's part of the reason why the decision also needs to go to the executive, is because a decision to proceed to construction will involve a significant expenditure, and in the financial environment we're in, that absolutely needs to have that ability to be something that the executive wishes to prioritise.
And the timescales too, if it does proceed to go to build, the timescales of the project for build is going to take a significant amount of time.
Yes. So obviously we have single year budgets at the moment. So from a budget process perspective, we work year by year, and the question is, do we have the confidence that that's the right approach, and that it's affordable in that system and in that scenario? And certainly for 24-25, anything that we would need to support a ministerial decision to proceed is ring-fenced and is in the budget. And future year budgets haven't been set, but that's again why it needs to have that visibility of affordability across the lifetime of the project before the decision can be taken.
And since the Minister has come into post, has he met all relevant stakeholders in relation to the A5? So I'm talking about, the A5 Alliance, talk about no more delays. Has the Minister met with all of those people?
He has certainly met with an awful lot of people who would be deemed stakeholders in the A5. I doubt very much he's met with everybody who would have an interest, and as far as I know, he has not met with any members of the Alternative A5 Alliance, although we have as officials met with them over the past year.
So the Minister is making a decision in relation to this, but hasn't met with all of the stakeholders?
It would be perfectly typical for a Minister not to meet with every individual, but the department and his officials meet with stakeholders all the time. That again was also the point of the public inquiry, was to allow anyone who had a view on the scheme to express that view and have that taken into account in the consideration.
Which is fair enough, but I suppose there are quite significant sensitivities around the A5. So, that would be a concern, I suppose, of mine, in the decision-making process. It's important that we hear all views in relation to it, and I take it that obviously as departmental officials you've met, but certainly, from a ministerial point of view, this is a flagship project of an executive. It would be disappointing to know that, he hasn't perhaps met with all of the stakeholders.
I think it's fair to say that we will be feeding back to the Minister every view from every stakeholder that we have met, and I don't think we can underestimate the importance of the public inquiry. That's what the public inquiry is there to do, to give people their voice, to hear the voices for and against the scheme. We at official level have met with pretty much every stakeholder. In fact, every stakeholder that we're aware of across the scheme. And in making his decision, the Minister will be considering all of the views from both statutory and non-statutory stakeholders on the scheme.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask quite a localised question, I suppose. It's no surprise, obviously, I represent the area that falls into where the A5 is going through, and I have, in my capacity as an MLA, written to the Minister in relation to some of the issues. Look, the A5 and the amount of volume that is on that road, it's completely different now to what it would have been 50 years ago, and we take that point. The road, I suppose, we're looking at road safety, people's decision making, it is unsafe from that point of view, given the volume of traffic as well that is on the road. There is the other side of the argument in relation to landowners and compensation levels and things like that. At the minute, there's geotechnical investigations happening. Those are on a voluntary basis. How difficult is that going to be in terms of your scoping out of the project, in terms of the investigations, considering this as a voluntary basis?
Okay, so there's geotechnical investigations and archaeological investigations ongoing at the moment, and the more, as any designer will say, the more information from a geotechnical perspective we can get, the better, and likewise, to de-risk the job from future delays, the more archaeological coverage we can get, the better. The view is at this point in time that it's not the first geotechnical information or surveys that we've carried out. There have been a series carried out over many years. So the designers are fairly confident with the level of information that they have, and they're mapping it up in such a way that they're looking at the key areas. Some areas geotechnical information is less important than others. For example, at a structure you want to have as much geotechnical information as you possibly can get to define whether you're going to need piles, and if you do need piles, how deep they're going to be, and so on. In other locations where the ground conditions aren't terribly difficult or there isn't a structure, you don't need that same amount of information. And so we're very confident that we've got enough information, and to append to that, once we do vest the land, we will have an opportunity to go into any other areas of land that we haven't had permission to enter at this point in time. So we have enough time between then and construction starting.
So how many landowners have you requested geotechnical investigations and archaeology? You know what I'm trying to say?
I don't have those figures.
No, I don't have those figures, but I do know that we have about a 70% success rate of people actually allowing us to go in, which has been very helpful from the landowners.
Okay.
This is not a unique issue to the A5. Like, this is something that we have on any scheme. Like the last scheme that I built and opened was the A6 between Dungiven and Drumahoe, and we did the very same thing for geotechnical and archaeological investigation. We went on as much land as we possibly could by agreement prior to the vesting order being made, and then afterwards got the rest of it. So it's trying to just get as much done so that we're as informed as possible, that if the green light is given, we can then get on the ground and actually start construction works quicker than we would be able to if we had to do all of that work beforehand.
Mark, you looking on that?
We supplementary on that, and say, taking that A6 experience, which was fairly recent, would the access rate have been greater or less than, or around 70% in that stretch?
I don't have the figures, but recollection, and we're going back to about 2016-17 when we were doing access in there. My recollection that there were a number of landowners that didn't want us in the land, and there were a number of landowners who had planted out whatever their crop was for that year, and didn't want us on, and we agreed not to go on. So I think the figures are probably going to be pretty comparable, Mark, but they probably don't exist anywhere to actually say this was the exact figure at the time, but that's my recollection of it.
Okay, and then just one sort of last question from me in terms of what I've been asking. In terms of, obviously there are farmers along that route, and in terms of like cattle and underpasses and that type of thing, you're under no legal obligation to carry out such works. I hear that point, but the department will look at it at a case by case basis. So what I have received back is that where it is cost effective and mutually beneficial, such works will be carried out in lieu of a compensation payment. So where do you see, what do you mean by mutually beneficial? Because how is it going to be mutually beneficial to the likes of yourselves? It's more beneficial to the likes of the landowner, the farm. I know from a road safety point of view, you're going to say that it's mutually beneficial for yourselves, but then they're also having to make a call of whether then they don't get another compensation payment as a result.
Okay, so I can take that. So ultimately, compensation is there to try and set the landowner back in a position after the scheme no worse than they were before the scheme, and where we are approached or asked to provide an accommodation underpass of any sort, what we'll do is get LPS to do an assessment of what the compensation would be with the underpass and what the compensation would be without the underpass. And if the compensation, so So let's take a real example. If you've got a farm that's going to be completely severed by the road, so half the farm's on one side of the road and half the farm's on the other side of the road, the compensation is going to be very significant in that case. If we're only going round the perimeter of the farm and there's only a small piece of land that's left on the other side, the compensation is going to be is going to be much less from a severance perspective in that case, and the practicalities of it, well, is it worth providing an underpass to access a quarter of an acre of land which is left of a 200-acre farm? It's not going to be practical, but if it is half a farm or a third of a farm, it's going to be more practical. So in order to ensure that we're delivering value for money for the public purse, that's the test that we get LPS to carry out, so that before the compensation with and the compensation without an underpass, and if the compensation covers the cost of the underpass, then we'll provide it. So we're open to having those discussions. There have been discussions with all the farmers across the scheme, and these decisions have been taken over the last decade as well. But certainly, if there's any farmers that still want to have discussions about that, we can come out and we can look at the individual cases.
Okay, and I suppose before I move on to any other, we do sympathise with the families who have lost loved ones on the A5. There's not a month, I suppose, that goes by that we don't have a road closure on that road, and unfortunately, sometimes that is a fatality on the road, and so we're keen to ensure that there is road safety in terms of the A5, and that there are improvements to ensure that there are safety measures on the road. But we do sympathise with all those families who've lost loved ones on the A5. I'm going to come to Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and just to echo your comments about our sympathies with the family of those, absolutely. I think that's important today to do so. Thanks so much for the information so far, and Colin, again, we talk about multi-year budgets and how important they will be, and I'm firmly in agreement with you, and I think the sooner we can roll out the better, particularly for schemes of this nature, because I do take my hat off to anyone trying to plan a capital project of this nature on a rolling one-year budget. It's borderline impossible, so I do accept how difficult that is. In terms of the cocktail of funding, and associating that with what we know is almost inevitable overspends when it comes to particularly public sector capital projects, where does the burden of overspend lie when a cocktail of funding is put together? So say, for example, ROI put in X amount of 100 million, but the scheme goes over by 25%. Is the Northern Ireland Executive liable for that, or will everybody who contributed to the cocktail of funding have to take the hit?
So there's no obligation on anyone to take the hit in that sense.
Right.
So so at the minute, the Government of Ireland have offered €600 million towards the cost of the scheme. So that's what's been put forward. Right back to 2007, there have been discussions between the Executive and the Irish Government on the scheme and how it would be delivered and all the rest of it. And part of that affordability mix and sequencing mix and when the costs are incurred is all part of the thing that the Minister needs to weigh up when he comes to his decision point. And it is important just to emphasise again that the Minister hasn't taken a decision on this. So we're answering a lot of questions on the work that we've done to prepare for a decision, and that has to include the option to proceed. But the Minister has not yet taken that. There's a statutory process to support that. So questions around future funding, there will be a need to confirm the affordability of whatever the Minister decides he wishes to do, and it's kind of up to the Executive to be comfortable with that, and obviously the Finance Minister will then need to take account of what the Executive decides in any future budget allocations. It would be right to assume that in general infrastructure prices continue to rise, so the project is an expensive one already. And that is a factor that needs to be thought about. But in terms of where the liability for any cost increase, in law and in fact it sits with the Executive and with the Department for Infrastructure. Whether there are other agreements that go around that would be a question for another day, I think.
Thank you. And following on from the Chair's point then around the compensation factor for potentially farmers or those affected by the scheme, I'm assuming that's factored into the initial costings, yes?
Yeah.
And is that an indicative anticipated figure? almost guesstimated?
So it's a figure which is provided by LPS,
Okay.
who have carried out this
assessments.
sort of work on the likes of the A6, the A26, the A4, the A8. So they've got a wealth of experience of this here. And I suppose it's maybe worth just pointing out there were some rumours around a few months ago that we were cutting the budget for compensation, and that's most definitely not the case. You know, there's legislation there, it's very clear, and it's set out as to how compensation is measured and attributed to landowners. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear, that we're not cutting or attempting to cut any corners from that perspective.
And the final point, Chair, if I may then, Colin, you talked about the preparatory work then that the departments had to do in terms of that works before the Minister looks at it. Is any of that looked at potentially starting or working on aspects of the project that are less contentious, less problematic, and basically getting started on where you can make gains quickly without the difficulties that exist? Has that been looked at and factored in?
So all options in terms of phasing are open at this point in time, and that's part of what the Minister needs to decide. And certainly any delivery strategy doesn't, we're not going to literally start building every kilometre, 85 squads out doing a kilometre each or something like that. So yes, that will be taken into account into the process. I don't know if you want to say anything more about
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. And again, it's come back, no decision is taken, but in any of the work that we've been doing since certainly since prior to this latest public inquiry and right up till now, is to ensure that how we move forward minimises the risk of any future successful legal challenge on the scheme. So all of that you've just questioned comes into play in those considerations.
That's all from me at this stage, Chair.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you. Thanks, folks. Just a couple of points. Looking back at the Audit Office report in February 24, estimated 1.7 billion. I know I appreciate the position we're in, you've made it very clear, but is there any update on that?
Not at this point in time.
That you can reveal? No.
Yeah, no.
Okay. And just touching on the Chair's point on timescales, is there anything further on that? I think the AFI were quoted last year as saying they would like to have it completed by 2028. I presume that's unreasonable at this
part of that complicated mix of decision factors.
Yeah.
So as I say, the options on phasing have a direct impact on when you need money and also when you finish, and that's part of what the Minister will be considering over the next few months.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And just another point, obviously the earlier discussion you probably be aware was around road safety. And when you see the statistics here, even 1 year, October 21 to October 22, 10 people killed alone on this stretch of road. I suppose, has any consideration been given, to interim measures in the meantime, given the scale of this project, over 50 miles of roadway, about how we can, ultimately reduce, the very alarming statistics on that? And I'm thinking of things, reviewing speed limits, average speed cameras, improving lighting at key junctions. Some of the road I'm more familiar with than others, but certainly my experience, some of the junctions are particularly dangerous, particularly for people that aren't, familiar with the roads and so on. And I think given the startling statistics and the time scales that has already elapsed, is there an opportunity to look at interim measures, or is that just parked, waiting on the Minister to act?
So it's far from parked, and I think if you look over the last number of years, there've been quite a few interventions on the existing A5. Now, clearly they're not having every impact that we would want, but the number of interventions that we've delivered over the length of what would be the scheme is quite significant. And even I would encourage you to look at the council reports for this year and the schemes that are set out for the A5, and there's 3 or 4 schemes set out for along the A5 in terms of junction upgrades and other improvements, and we continue to look at that. And as recently as this week, we've been talking about some additional work that could be carried out on the existing road that the Minister is keen to see around improving the markings and the signs and other things that can help drivers be more safe on the road. But I think you kind of touched on one of the reasons why the department proposed this scheme in the first place, which is that the existing road has so many openings and so many points that we would consider to be less than desired from a safety perspective, that building the new offline dual carriageway is the right engineering answer, rather than trying to address everywhere that the risk is. Removing the traffic from that road would have more beneficial impact for safety than most of the things that we could yet do on the existing road. So, fair enough.
Yeah, as and I suppose I don't know if any had the opportunity to be at the public inquiry, but one of the days did look at alternatives. The PAC wanted us to demonstrate or present to them what alternatives could be provided, as opposed to the entire dual carriageway, the full length. And that was one of the reasons it took longer to actually get information ready for the public inquiry and for the public inquiry to be reconvened in 2023, was this work that we were doing. And we did a thorough piece of work looking at 2+1s and upgrading junctions and closing junctions along the existing A5. And there's nothing that comes anywhere near the benefits of building a dual carriageway and the number of lives that would be saved with that. And I think we're always quoted the A4, where there was a reduction of something like 95% or thereabouts in fatalities once the dual carriageway was built, and that's the sort of stark reality that we have. So there aren't any. It's our position that there aren't any alternatives which are going to deliver the benefits that are needed.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But just the time being realistic, it is years away. And what about just finally on the speed limit issue on any sections of the A5? Is that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have considered is whether a route review of the speed limits along the road would be beneficial. So that is something that we're considering. Speed limits themselves don't always have the impact that we would like in a situation like this. So you can see, for example, on the A1 when you've got a speed limit that drops to 60 in a number of places instead of 70, and not every driver pays any attention to that. So yes, we could, but would it change any of the behaviours that are maybe contributing to some of the accidents? It may or may not. I think it's not obvious to us that it definitely would, and we also have to be mindful of how many people use that road for economic purposes and for social purposes, where journey times are relevant to people. So again, there's a balance to be struck, and it's important to try and to figure out which interventions will have the biggest impact. As I say, that kind of brings us back to why the department proposed an offline dual carriageway in the first place. But it's a very valid question.
There's another point just on that there, and if you're travelling the A5 any time through the day, the speeds are not going to be high to start with. It's the speeds will get high whenever there's less traffic on it, whenever it gets darker, and people are less. If people are wanting to speed, they're less likely to pay heed to the speed limits that are there. But yeah, as Colin says, it's being considered.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just I suppose following on from that, we're obviously looking at the road safety strategy, and we've had the Superintendent Chief, or Sam Donaldson, into the committee, and I'm just wondering. Obviously, we have the figures in terms of all of the incidents at crossroads in Northern Ireland, but is there any specific modelling of the A5 in terms of causation factors of fatalities or seriously injured? Because we hear an awful lot about the road being the primary cause when it comes to the A5, and I'm not taking away from the fact that people have very sadly lost their lives on the road, but we do need to understand what is the main cause of fatalities and seriously injured. I think it's important as well for the public, because I drive that road and I have to be honest, I hate driving on that road. If I have to drive from Ballygolly through to Londonderry, it is, honestly, I hate it. I would rather take an airplane than do that, because it is a really scary road to drive on. So is there specific modelling for the A5 in terms of causation factors along that road?
So that's a story that I hear all the time from people, that they are scared to travel that road. I think the reality is that it's very difficult to point to specific causation factors for every accident that happens, and human error is probably high up in a lot of accidents, not just on the A5 but anywhere. But if they then take a road that's got something like 1,200 accesses onto it, so instead of having 20 accesses onto it, you're increasing the risk significantly. You're just multiplying the risk significantly. So if we have a new dual carriageway, the only accesses we will have will be slip roads on and slip roads off, other than the start and the end of it. So that 1,200 disappears, and so if you're not put in that situation where you have a difficult junction, difficult sight lines, lots of traffic coming, you're taking that away, and therefore the chances of an accident occurring are much, much less. More importantly, the right turn movement. So if you're turning out of a junction to the right across the traffic, or turning into a junction across the traffic, we'll not have that situation at all on the new dual carriageway. So the actual the statistics, which I don't have in front of me but are quite stark, the difference for modelling purposes, which takes all the information across the UK and Ireland on the relationship or between a single carriageway and a dual carriageway are stark. The differences, and they're in that sort of the area that I talked about before, but the A4 and 95% reduction in fatalities. And it's because you've done away with all of those risks that are there. You're not asking drivers to drive out of those junctions or into those junctions any longer. The causation factors, or guides will have access, or traffic teams will have access across the board, and you maybe heard this earlier, I'm not sure, but across the board to the PSNI's data, and the causation factors will be, as far as possible, highlighted there, and our teams that are working on the A5 will have had access to that as well. But the causation factor is less important on a scheme like this, where you're actually replacing the entire single carriageway with a dual carriageway, because of the benefits that I've just mentioned, as opposed to if you were doing a very localised improvement. It would be key what was the causation factor if you had 3 or 4 major incidents or fatalities there, so that you can specifically address those causation factors in the localised treatment that you would put in place. Because the A5 will provide a global treatment for the entire route, they're less critical in our considerations, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then, no offence to yourselves that are in front of the committee, but I did read the Northern Ireland Audit Office report that recently came out in relation to, flagship projects in Northern Ireland that we've only one that has sort of went ahead. Obviously, you've referenced the fact that the A5 is one of the executive's flagship projects. Some of you been talking about it since 2007, and I suppose locally before that even as well. So one of the, and I'm not sure if you can talk to this, obviously, because it is going through the PSE and one thing and another, but one of the key aspects in relation to it was the expertise to be able to deliver projects like this. And obviously we're aware of staffing levels and the difficulties within civil engineering, just even at a very, tar in the road level. So if this project gets the go ahead, how confident are you? Obviously, it'll get the go ahead with timescales and with the options that have been decided upon. How confident are you that then it will meet those targets based on what staffing levels you have?
So I'm in this role since April 23, so not much over a year. I'm in that role because of the track history that I have in delivering dual carriageway schemes on time and to budget, and I've mentioned a couple of them there before. So, but you're absolutely right. It's key to have the right key staff there. We have developed, as part of the business case, a delivery team, both on the department side and on the consultants who are supporting us to deliver the scheme. We have filled a number of those key vacancies within that, and anticipate if the scheme were to move forward that we would be filling more of those vacancies within that. So I'm confident that we have the right structure there, and I'm confident that we will be able to fill them. The other one is Seamus here has had the pleasure or other ways of taking the scheme forward in the last 10 years, has a massive knowledge of the history of the scheme, and we've managed to keep Seamus on board for those number of years. So yeah, it's not without its challenges. You've heard, you said yourself, the challenges that we do face across the board in the industry to get people in. The fact that the department are not the department's remuneration package is not as competitive as it in the engineering side as it is in the private sector, but we have the ability to tap into our consultants to provide more of the services that we need if we can't deliver them ourselves.
And I think as well that the Minister has made clear the priority he affords to ensuring that the scheme is resourced appropriately for whatever it looks like. And certainly through this development phase, we've been happy that we've been able to grow the team to meet the needs of the process and the time that we were at, and we would expect that would continue. And you're right to highlight that at a departmental level, and certainly at a level across the group that we work in, resourcing is a constraint. What it means though is that you need to just be very clear about what the priorities are and ensure that they are appropriately resourced. The things that you do, you must do in a well resourced and appropriately resourced way, and it will be something else that either doesn't get done or gets done on a different scale or in a different way, that you need to take a decision there to accommodate the priorities.
Members, does anybody else have any other questions that they wish to raise? Keith?
Just a quick one on land agents. I know we're maybe going down the road a wee bit whenever a land agent acts on behalf of a farmer or a landowner. Is that land agent normally employed by DFI, or what way does that work? What does it explain that land agent process? So if I was a farmer on the A5,
so we will pay reasonable costs of any land agent that a landowner needs to employ. What generally happens is that the agent will put together will not charge the landowner generally in the months and years ahead of the claim going in, and once the claim is put in, that land agent will take their fee out of the claim at that point in time. So, but we are paying for that land agent.
The landowner, he or she selects that land agent?
Yeah.
So just one other point, I've done some work with farmers and landowners in the A32, the Macrofell bypass, and then the A6, the Castle Dawson Toon bit, as I call it. But there's a degree of mistrust with DFI. This is not me saying it, there's the farmers, and a farmer very much wants to farm, but they'll have a conversation, for example, Seamus, about what posts the farmer's getting. 4 years later, Seamus could be away, with no disrespect to Seamus, so the individual's gone. The farmer says, well, I agreed that with Seamus. Seamus is gone. A farmer very much does the deal there and then. They don't do the email, they don't do the follow-up, and I've explained to them Cookstown could come on board all emails, all communication by written consent from DFI. But there's a degree of work that DFI needs to do, in my opinion, with landowners to get that degree of trust. They're always sceptical of DFI, and bear in mind, if you have a farm and a road goes through the middle of it, not taking away the road safety issue, that destroys that. And no money. I've had loads of farmers tell me money does not purchase land. Because land 10 mile away is no good to you. Your farm's there. So it has to be an understanding of the degree of impact that has on a farm and a farming family. It destroys them. It turns the young family, well, I'm not farming that farm's destroyed. So I think there's a bit of work to do from DFI's point of view to get farmers and landowners on your side and stand over your agreements. And appreciate it's a long period of time. Especially any road, irrespective, it's a long period of time from the start to the finish. But I've had no good reports in that A32 or A6. The farmers seem to be, always getting the raw deal. So there's a degree of work, the DFI needs to do with the landowner community to get them on side and stand over agreements. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the team for coming on. A lot of the questions have been asked, and I think comprehensive answers given. Just thinking in terms of your latest or recent question there, Chair, on the resourcing of the team to drive this forward. I think there's a tremendous weight of responsibility on you guys here too. I mean, the fact that this is a flagship project that nearly 20 years on and £110 million and over 50 lives later, not a saw it has been turned as a sad indictment of how this place operates or doesn't, although there does seem to be, and hopefully it continues, a real focus on actually getting this across the line and on the ground now. In terms of the process that has to be gone through, sorry if I didn't quite fully pick this up, Colin, obviously we want to make sure the Minister takes the time he needs and has to make a decision so that it is, I suppose, as challenge-proof as possible. But you'd indicated there the late summer is when you would expect an announcement to be made. Does that mean an announcement can't be made before then? Are there statutory obligations that have to be carried out that would indicate no decision can be made or announcement can be made before that?
So I alluded earlier on to we're nearly there with the detail which needs to be put in front of the Minister, and the Minister's seen a lot of detail, but he hasn't seen absolutely everything. There's still a number of issues which he'll need to give consideration to. So that drives the programme. There's a couple of pieces of information which I'll not get into in an open session that we need some more information to close those out, and we also then, which is the second biggest contributing factor, it will be an executive referral. So that's, given the amount of information that we have, it's important that we give the executive a reasonable amount of time to consider the information. So as I said at the start, there's going to be a series of documents which will be issued to the executive over the coming months to allow the executive to give consideration to that, and then all being well, the Minister taking a decision by the end of the summer. But it's been driven by process almost. The couple of issues that we have to close down, and then the process is driving the timescale at the moment.
And you said that you, as a team, as opposed to the Minister, had met with the alternative A5 Alliance, and I wonder, Seamus, you've been about this project longer than the other guys. Do you detect any, I suppose, dilution in terms of their appetite to oppose or challenge the scheme, or has there been particular focus on their previous areas of concern?
That's an area that I don't think that we could really comment on, and certainly in this session. That's okay then. And then finally, I suppose, and Keith had touched on this, and it's the importance of trust and among landowners that you have to do the business with to get this going and get the show on the road, or get the road on the road. I think it's imperative, and Keith had referred to his work along a stretch of the A6, that any loose ends that there are along outstanding pieces of road or outstanding pieces of work that need to be done along recent roads would need to be tied up, because like word spreads, particularly among the farming community, and where there is that lack of trust, or people feel maybe hard done by, or are still in the midst of a process that's been going on for maybe 10 or 20 years, it's not going to encourage other people along the A5 to sit down and do business with you. Point noted.